Thank you so much, Tim, and East Cobb for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I got to say that this is a very near and dear topic to me. Just even from my own life, the trauma that I've experienced over the years, and just the incredible opportunity it is to be with clients as we work through trauma. It's a very hard, difficult place, but I know it's something near and dear to the Lord's heart. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity to share some things with you that I've learned over the years, and some things that I've been seeing as I've been working with clients. And I'm hoping that that can be an encouragement and a help to you as we go through. Just one disclaimer as we go through. I need you to know that I'm not going to ever present to you a formula that you can just like plug through and be like, hey, this is what I can do for this situation or this situation. What we're going to talk about tonight is essentially principles that can be applied and can be worked through as you work through some trauma. But there's not one answer for one particular trauma. Everybody's going to be unique. Everybody's going to respond differently to things. And so every person gets their own treatment plan from the Lord and how he's going to work in their trauma. And so let me get going here. So I'm originally from York, Pennsylvania. I'm a Northerner, and I have experienced trauma in my childhood, in my home and outside of my home. And that trauma really is what helped bring me to faith through the ministry of a high school when I was in high school. And in 2003, I met my wife, Beth, and we have two daughters who are 14, 11. There's my schooling. I have a bachelor's in vocal music education. I graduated from Covenant, and most recently from Regent University with a counseling degree. For the most of my professional career, I've been in the music world, worship and music particularly. I taught high school for 4 years, and then recently for another year, and then worship and music ministry within the church for a good while in Pennsylvania, Virginia, St. Louis, and then here in Georgia. So my transition into care and counseling really happened in 2014 as the Lord began asking me questions and calling to me to be more intentional with people's hearts in my ministry. Out of that, I began to desire to attend a training sponsored through the Allender Center in Seattle called the Narrative Focused Trauma Training. That was from 2018 to 2019. And then in June 2020 is when I officially stepped out of worship and music ministry, and began doing pastoral counseling with Tim. And so now that I'm graduated with my counseling degree, I'm going to be working towards being licensed. And then certainly continuing my Allender experience. So tonight's presentation has a great influence from Dan and the folks from the Allender Center, certainly also my professors, two of my professors who've helped me with it, Dr. Bruns and Dr. Glover, and then a lady by the name of Judith Herman is actually going to help us with the structure of what does it look like to care for a child who's gone through trauma. So I think tonight what I want to start is to talk about our God-given design. We were all made to be in the image of God. We were all, and because of that image, we were all made to be in relationship with one another. We know that God is a triune God who is in relationship within himself, and he desired to be in relationship with us. And so we are made as human beings to be in relationship with one another. And particularly, we are made with these three attributes of attunement, containment, and repair. Every human is made for these three things. And when one of these three things, or many of these three things are broken, we experience trauma. So let me further define what attunement is. So attunement is this desire for us to be known, to be valued and loved and cherished. It is the expression of love from one person to another. Dr. Kurt Thompson, some of you may be familiar with his work, does exceptional work, as well as Dan. But he says, we come expecting to be seen by someone looking for us. And so every child wants to know that they are loved. They want to be known, they want to be seen and valued. And certainly, as we all do, we want to experience that attunement from each other. And part of being made in the image of God is that we reflect that ability in God. There's various places in the Bible that God expresses to us his attunement of us, but particularly in Exodus 2:24-25, we read of God seeing and hearing and knowing the cries of the Israelites as they're in Egypt. He knows that they're in pain. He sees them. He hears their cries, we're told. He knows exactly how to attune to our needs. The issue is that when we go through trauma, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but when we go through trauma, we begin to doubt that attunement. We doubt that attunement from God, and we doubt that attunement from other people. That's attunement. Then there's containment. We are all made to know structure and order for boundaries. Relationally, that looks like knowing that I'm going to stay within myself, and I'm not going to inflict myself on you. So if I were in the simple thing would be if I were in a counseling room, or even tonight, I've set this boundary of we're going to talk for 45 minutes, and then we're going to allow for at least 15 minutes full of questions. So I want to honor that. And that's me being offering some containment. And you can trust that I'm going to keep myself at my word. But in order to have that boundary, I need to have power and strength. I need to be able to say no, and I need to be able to say yes to things. And certainly we see that containment given to us from the Lord. We see that in the Ten Commandments. We see that in the structure that he provides to us. And isn't it wonderful that the attunement comes before the containment for us in those 10 commandments? You know, the beginning of the 10 commandments has that great prologue that says, I have taken you out of Egypt. I have loved you. I have provided for you. Now here's how you live. And that's the boundaries. That's us living in his world that he's designed for us. Relationally, that's going to look like I'm going to know the boundaries of myself. I'm not going to inflict myself on another person and consume them, or I'm not going to hit them or exert power and strength over and above on them. And so that's that idea of containment. And that's where it can begin to go wrong as we are sinners. So the third thing, because we know that we can't attune perfectly, we can't contain perfectly, we need to repair. We are made to know that there will be repair brought if there's been damage done to the relationship. As I said there, it's likely when there's an overbalance or an of attunement or containment. So sometimes we can have all the love and no containment, or we can have the flip. We can have no love and all the structure, well, and all the strength and the power. Well, what that does is it's not how God designed it. And so we need to be able to repair and to come to each other for forgiveness. Certainly we see that in marriages. We need that between parents and children. And we see it, God providing the grounds for forgiveness for us through what Christ reconciling us to God. We know that our sin keeps us from relationship with him, and God provides that repair through Christ. And that's the grounds for us to being able to forgive and repair other people. As human beings, we are made for all three of those things. We're made for attunement. We're made to be known and loved and valued and cherished. We're made for containment, to know power and strength, to experience boundaries and order, and we're made to know repair as well. So this slide here is the matrix, what they call the matrix in the Allender Center. And you can see that top line there is that attunement, containment, and repair. Below that next line, that attunement is the building blocks for us to have faith, for us to trust one another. And as we know and we value and we cherish each other, we can begin to trust. As we experience containment, as we experience that power and that strength, we can have hope, because hope is faith. As faith is for what's done in the past, hope is faith for the future. We know that containment is going to be there, and so we say, I hope that he's going to be done at 7:45. I mean, that's a simple example, but the containment, and that's how hope and containment are related. Then there's repair. This repair of being able to love, experience love in the present, and faith and hope, as the Apostle Paul says, but the greatest of these is love. So faith, hope, and love for Dan and the Allender Center are very crucial. These next couple lines are grayed out because we really don't have time to go into them, but kind of where faith, hope, and love go wrong, where sin enters in and it destroys it, we experience betrayal with faith. Where hope is destroyed, we experience powerlessness. Where love is destroyed, we experience ambivalence. And something that I've seen is that we bodily experience depression when we have betrayal. We experience a lot of anxiety when there's powerlessness, and we experience shame when there's ambivalence. And then the next two lines pertain to calling and how those all fit together. Again, we don't have time for all that tonight, but I just wanted to show you that there's a fuller some things going on there, but it is helpful for us. So as we talk about trauma proper, we know that the word trauma itself means wound, and trauma is just not something. It's not just an event, but it's an experience and something that happens within us. It's the wound within. I'll use the word trauma tonight And we'll talk about big T trauma and little T trauma, but really it's the experience within, because I think, as I said earlier, everybody's experience is different. The way I experience one traumatic event may be different than Tim might experience a traumatic event. As one counselor that I know said, trauma is anything that makes your world unsafe. And so a big C trauma, as we most often call it, those would be our rape, sexual abuse, divorce, significant job loss, a sudden death of a loved one. Tim even mentioned COVID would be a big T trauma. And in those traumas, we're overwhelmed with a sense of powerlessness and with a sense of being alone without protection and provision. An example of this that I've encountered recently would be an interaction of a mother and a daughter after the daughter was gang raped. She came home to her mom, and she said, and her mom said, we need to quickly clean you up, and you are to never talk about this again. You can imagine what happened, how that affected the daughter for the rest of her life. And I think she was 53 when she started to get treatment for what happened, because she was told not to tell anybody. She kept it within, and all of this stuff came to the surface. And it was because her mother, as she was cleaning her up, said, we're not ever going to talk about this again. It's over and done with. Of course, it wasn't. Little T traumas. On the surface, they may seem minor. They may be this repeated exposure to something like a lesser attack or a mocking. They might be overly strict parents. It might be even us as children serving as the surrogate spouse for a parent, or even getting checked out as a child or a teen from someone for your looks. I mean, they may be benign, what we might say is benign, but repeated exposure can cause lasting damage to us. One example, several examples that come to mind here are, there's an 18-month-old, recently I was told, a story of he was with his extended family with a cousin at a concert, and they were listening to Shark Attack song. Well, as that song went through, as it was being played, he got obscenely scared. And so much so that he began shrieking as the shrieking was happening in the song. And later that day, as they got home, he began to shriek again, just like he heard during the concert. And they had to again comfort him, reassure him, come alongside of him. That was a traumatic event, and he displayed for the next week or so trauma in response to that song. My daughter Emma, and I've spoken with her about this, early on when she was about 1.5 or so, she said she met a Jack Russell Terrier who was barking at her and not very nice to her. And ever since then, she's had a fear of dogs until about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. She was able to come around and experience a different side of dogs. And now we have a dog of our own, and we're actually dog sitting. And but before that, she was terrified of dogs, and it was because she had a traumatic event with a dog, and she felt scared. And thankfully, God was able to help us help her through it. But that's an example. And then the last example is a father and a son who verbally abused him with sports. The father, when getting in the car, would after a sports event, would just critique him and never tell him any of the good job that he did. Was never kind to him about sports, always negatively critiquing him. And that had a a big impact on him as he grew and is now an adult and responding out of that. So trauma in this wound comes from brokenness and fragmentation. It fragments our minds, it fragments our relationships, and out of this, out of a mixture of sinfulness and beauty, we attempt to repair that brokenness ourselves. And the evil one seeks to use trauma to mar, kill, and destroy that image of God within us. He uses it to affect the heart. For children, they often are unable to cope and make their world work. And so they often comply. And children, when they are traumatized, tend to blame themselves. It's my fault that mommy and daddy got a divorce. It's my fault that I was sexually abused. It's my fault that I can't see Johnny anymore. I can't go over and play at his house or whatever. That's how children are affected in the heart. Another thing is that how it affects the heart is it breeds shame and contempt. Shame is different from guilt in that guilt is I've done bad. Shame is I am bad. I think Brene Brown was very helpful with that several years ago in making that distinction. It's when we feel like a failure, that it's exposure of our heart, and we feel like a failure. And so out of that shame, we cover with contempt. We cover with anger towards ourselves. We have anger towards others. A simple one is you're late for work and you're trying to find your keys. Well, oftentimes when you're late, you begin to be exposed and you think you're going to be a failure, or people are going to see you as a failure. And so then you say, where are my keys? Why can't I ever do anything right? I can't ever put my keys in the right place. That's contempt. That's joining with the enemy against ourselves. And so then out of that shame and contempt, we make agreements and vows. Agreements are, I am unable to do that. Especially, that's a very simple one. Like if someone has been saying to you, you're just an ugly piece of blankety blank. You're going to, after a while, begin to believe that you are an ugly piece of blankety blank. That is how our mind works. And as unfortunately, that's trauma in being played out. Out of that, then we can also make a vow and say, I will never let that happen again. And unfortunately, as we say, I will never do such and such again, while our intentions may be good, that may not be the best thing for us. And that's a vow that the enemy gets us to close down our hearts and keep us from experiencing life. So trauma also affects the mind. We know that from brain scans and such that the trauma impacts the brain chemicals that help us regulate our system. Oftentimes in trauma, the right side of the brain, which is the emotional side, shuts down, which leaves us to the left side, which is the logical side, to manage. It also changes the limbic system, which is the emotional system of the brain, and leaves us agitated and alert. Somebody who has all consistently been worried that their father's going to come home from work and be a terror will always begin to be afraid and become alert at night as they go to bed. That's how trauma affects the mind. It affects the body. We begin to live outside of our body. We become detached or numb. We can feel residual pain in the places of abuse, or other parts of our bodies as for years to come. And trauma can be the cause of bodily ailments like arthritis, fibromyalgia, anxiety, and many others. There's a brilliant book by a guy named Bessel van de Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. It's very helpful for seeing how trauma affects the body. And then trauma affects the soul. Trauma brings further distance between us and God, mainly by raising doubts of God's goodness, his faithfulness. That's that attunement piece, and also his provision and his protection. That's the containment piece. And in our heartfelt rebellion, our sinful heartfelt rebellion, we want to take control. We want to be God. We want to solve it, and we want to live without dependence upon others because we don't want to let the trauma happen again. I think it's important for us as we think about children that unresolved trauma will continue to linger within our hearts. I know we've got several grandparents here tonight. I'm sure you can see that in your own life. Our present reactions today are echoes of our past. A prime example of this is if as a child we experience crashes or throwing things of plates against the wall, glass breaking, so forth, that may be in the middle of fights. You may experience when a glass shatters on the floor, you may be so startled that you might end up in a fetal position because you might be triggered from the presence of the glass. That's an example of how our present are echoes of our past. Often, because of that, we want to numb out emotionally. We use food, we use being on our phone, checking out, or pornography, or alcohol, or drugs. It also, trauma brings about the reality that we want to be enjoyed, but we often as well resist being in relationship with others and being fully known. Triggers may cause us to lash out, and we can blow up at the drop of a dime or a hat at our kids or a spouse. And one of the things that the evil one destroys the most in our being made in the image of God is that we hate the most our longing to be wanted and enjoyed. So as parents, we want our children to be safe. We want them to be perfect and happy. But we know that that's not a reality. We attempt at all costs to make that happen. But the way we respond as to our children is our response is rooted in our own emotional and spiritual health. We are the greatest tool that God has given to our children to care for them in the presence of trauma. One of the things I really appreciate about Paul Tripp's book on parenting is that the children are gifts to us. The children are placed in our lives for a reason, to help us to know him and to love him and to live within his world. And as parents, he's made them and us to interact and to regulate in the midst of trauma. We are given to them to help them to know how to respond to difficult things. And so we can help them to be the calm within the storm, just as Jesus was with the disciples. Our job is to help feel the waves for the child as they experience trauma. The thing about it is and this is where our sinfulness can kind of get in the way, is that our inclination is to fix it and then forget it. We want to push it away. We want to forget about it and not deal with it, just as that mother did with her daughter. And so it begs the question, I think probably every single one of us, even me included, is even saying, how have we responded to our child in the past? Has it been open? Has it been loving? And how might we begin to choose to respond differently in the future? So tonight, there's a three-stage model by Judith Herman, and this three-stage model is safety and stabilization, remembrance and mourning, and then reconnection and integration. And it's important for us to remember that restoration and healing from trauma is not linear. An event early in the child's life may reverberate into the present later in life, even though they may have healed through it at one stage. It may still circle back around and may need to be addressed later on in life. For instance, there's a family in our church who the family was riding together in a car, and it was the mother, the father, the daughter, and the father's mother. And the father and the mother's father and the father's mother were tragically killed. The only ones that were left were the mother and the child. And the child is doing well now, but later on in life, that child may need to revisit at different stages the grief, the loss with her father. Every child's going to respond differently throughout these stages. So those are some important things for us to remember as we think about these three stages. So the first stage is safety and stabilization. If you think about it, safety and stabilization is connected to containment. It's helping the child to regulate, helping them, getting them out of harm's way, beginning to restore their eating and their sleeping habits, helping them to restore their safety as a person. If they're take the car accident, for instance, they may not want to go down a certain road for a while. That needs to be okay. Being able to help them feel safe where they are and experience safety. For that little boy named Joey, it may be he may not be able to go to the beach, or he may experience some hesitation when he goes to the beach because of the shark. There may be that connection there. The idea is to reassure and help the child experience safety and stabilization by your presence. Oftentimes, we want to use our intellect by saying, "Oh, you're going to be safe. You're okay. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine." Well, they don't know that they're going to be fine. Our presence with them is the best way for them to know that they're going to be fine. So that's the first stage. The second stage is remembrance and mourning. This is the restoring the attunement. It's how do you make sense out of everything that's happened? I'm different now than I was before, and it's the process of working through the loss, hearing the story. Someone who's gone through a traumatic event like 9/11, I still remember where I was on 9/11. You all probably do as well. For our grandparents, you probably still remember the day Kennedy was shot, and you remember where you were. And I found myself for the next week or so after the where I was on 9/11, I needed to tell the story. And that's part of the process of grieving and working through trauma, is being able to tell the story to other people. Depending on the child, they may not be able to communicate their emotions to you very well. It might come out while they're playing. It's not going to be well thought out, and it certainly may not be linear as in A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So those are some things to remember. The last one is reconnection and integration. This is repairing their world, bringing them back into full integration of life. They're not always going to need an alternate route from a car accident. At one day, they will be able to go down that road again. That time will come in time. This is where they can re-engage with hope again for the future. In terms of caring for them, kind of readily, the two of the greatest things that any of us can do for not only our children, but for each other are listening and reflecting, and then also empathy. Listening and reflection is simple that. Be quick to listen rather than talk. Allow them to tell their story over and over as much as they need to. And then being able to reflect that story back to them. It's reflecting back what they said to you. Empathy then is often confused with sympathy. Sympathy is, I feel for you. Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes or viewing the world through someone else's eyes and ears. This is what God did with the Israelites. He said, I see and I hear and I know you. Jesus is the greatest example of being empathetic with us. He incarnated himself so that he might know fully our sinfulness and the temptation that we experience, obviously without sin, but he experienced our world for us. And so for us, it's being able to experience the child's world as if the parent was the child. So as I'm talking to my children and hearing my daughter complain because she has to do the dishes, something very, very benign and simple, I hear her whine and complain. And I say, yes, I hear you, I hear the anger and frustration that you don't want to do the dishes. You're tired. I get that. However, this is what we're going to do. You're going to do the dishes. The goal is for them to be seen, heard, and understood emotionally. That's going to help that regulation to restore them emotionally. That's going to get that right side of the brain kicked back on to the left. Some very basic resources. I don't have much because I'm not in your area. But one is reach out to the pastors at your church. They will be able to help you get connected to somebody in your area that is mindful about trauma for children, for those that may need more specific intense help. One person is Christy Pettit, who's with an organization called Paul Kids that's related to Atlanta West Side, a church within our presbytery. She's a great resource and a counselor, and that works with young ones in trauma. And then for you as adults needing care, you can certainly reach out to us at the Institute to Tim or myself. So